yeah, so I'm just gonna load all three of these with 6 rounds, and then we'll just kind of essentially work like reloads, but also goes in beaks because it's just 6 rounds in each magazine, and we'll just rock and roll. Turbulence on the ground. You know, I feel like it'd be a way for Johnson & Johnson to redeem themselves after the COVID shot. Like, sponsor me if there's a cloth bags. Like I'll do like boom boom, try to do some head shots too, and then what I'll do is I'll do some like reholstering, unholstering and firing drills. So, and then I also got these with 6 rounds, so I'm just kind of like flow through it completely. Good.
All right, guys, so we are back from the forest, and I was running the Glock 19X and my kind of Guccified Glock 19X. So in this video, we're going to be talking about my overall experiences with this guy, why I did what I did with it, what I've done with it, and just overall why I actually really love this gun. So let's jump right into it. So first off, like I said, this is my Glock 19X, and I actually had one previously. I ended up selling it and going for another route, and I actually ever since then had really wanted another Glock 19X, because after selling it I realized that I really do love the 19X, and while this is essentially a 45, you could get a lot of the same features out of a Glock 45 with this particular kind of gun. I wanted a 19X partly because I love the FDE color, but I also do love the aesthetics and the setup of this gun. And I also love the history of the 19X, how it competed with many other Valiant handguns in the US military pistol trials. It did not win, unfortunately, because SIG's automatic firing P320 won. I still think that this really should have been the gun that they chose, in my opinion, but there's a whole bunch of debate, and there are some valid reasons as to why the P320 won that contract and now is the M17, M18. However, for people like me, the Glock 19X still was the winner. So first off, let's dig into this gun a little bit more and what I did to it. So realistically, I actually haven't done that much to it. Still has a factory trigger, and I actually don't really hate the triggers for these guns. They're not bad. It's it's a Glock trigger, you know, it does what it does. But the things I did change was of course, the Glock 19X has an ambidextrous slide release, slide lock. So I went with the factory Glock extended slide release on these. And in my opinion, after you get used to shooting Glocks with extended slide releases, it's just a no-brainer. I don't really love the ones, I'm trying to remember who makes them, that are like up on the slide or super high. This is, for me, just fine. I don't grab my gun like abnormally high. So as you can see here, hopefully you can't really see too well, but I don't really hit it, don't really conflict it. So for me, having an extended slide release with the little nubbin on there makes a lot of sense, and I don't really accidentally hit it. I don't really ride the frame super high when I shoot anyways. So for me, that makes a lot of sense. Then after that, the only other things I've done is primarily just the slide. So I got a slide off of Brownells for a Gen 5 Glock, and you can realistically do away with what I was doing here, but the 19X that I got and that I found was just the standard, you know, run-of-the-mill Glock 19X, so it was not an MOS. They do now make 19Xs that are MOS, but I got one that had, you know, an RMR cut, of course, front slide serrations like I wanted, and it was also cut for a ported barrel. So I, of course, you guys can hopefully see the lighting isn't necessarily the best, but this is a ported barrel as well in here. But the slide, you know, is cut for a ported barrel, and then I have a RMR cut on here as well. So did that, replaced the, you know, sights that came on the slide with Ameriglow suppressor height sights so I could co-witness the RMR. So like I said, RMR cut, I did throw a Trijicon RMR on here as well. So there's that, and then of course the ported or compensated barrel. So that's all that I did. I really did more, like I said, to the slide and less to the frame, because there's really nothing. I'm okay with pretty much all of the 19X's features. Trigger could be better, but I feel like the trigger is just fine. But as far as it goes, I really wanted to, even with my original 19X, what I was wanting to do before I ended up selling it, to go to a different direction, aka this guy that ended up not really working out. So I still love the Prodigy. It is great. It's actually now reliable. So, you know, I love that gun. But originally I sold the 19X to go to the Prodigy. Then I didn't really like the Prodigy, so I went back to a 19X. So essentially what I did with this 19X is what I was planning to do with my original 19X, and that was to, you know, get an aftermarket slide on there that I could get a ported or compensated barrel and have an RMR cut on there. So essentially this is what I was planning to do with my original 19X before selling it to go to the Prodigy. So in the end, I actually now have both of them, but this is what I wanted to do with the 19X that I had originally all along. So I really do like it, and I will say having a ported barrel, while some people like to go with things like the Radian Ramjet, which might offer slightly more, you know, like push, because it is more of a compensator at the end of the barrel. What I like about the ported barrels like this is that when you're going with something like a 19, you're not really, you know, sacrificing, you're not adding any barrel length or any additional length here. You're also not really adding anything. That was the big thing for me. The Ramjet kind of pushes, so you have to get an aftermarket side and aftermarket, you know, accessories, because it pushes everything back to keep it the same length, but you're adding this extra, you know, attachment to the end of the barrel, and I'm just not a huge fan of the complexity that it adds. So the easiest way, of course, to do, you know, a similar type of recoil mitigation is to just, you know, put a hole in your slide and, you know, put a compensated barrel in there. So that's essentially what I went with here. This is the more simplistic, kind of more yeah, just overall simplistic way. And while it might not be as, you know, technically engineered as the Ramjet, so it may not offer quite as much compensation, this is still just a 9mm, and it is incredibly flat shooting. And I do really love the ports on the barrel. Of course, this is a 8-port, as you guys can hopefully see there. It's an 8-port, so 4 on each side, and they kind of push off at 45-degree angles, so you get really, really good downward pressure. And once again, it's kind of hard to illustrate, but shooting it, you get really good downward pressure, and you feel it, and it feels really good. So I do really love having the compensated barrel. Now it is a little bit louder because of course you're venting gas straight up, so it's definitely noticeably louder than, say, shooting something like this Prodigy, but the notable recoil mitigation that you get makes this thing so flat shooting. And obviously there's still recoil, you're not deleting recoil, but it is super flat shooting. So if it were me and I was to do it all over again, or recommend to someone like, hey, this is what you want to do, or this is what you don't want to do, this is probably what I would end up going for. I really like the 19X. Now, I think a lot of people personally should go to the Glock 45 because the 45 is essentially the same thing, but you don't have this weird little lanyard loop down here and you don't have this little nubbin right here, because this little nubbin will prevent you from having certain magazines being compatible, because they do have to work around this little nub. And of course, the other thing is it will prevent certain magazine base plate extensions from being able to go in. So a lot of people shave this off, and a lot of people remove this little nubbin here too, or the little lanyard loop. For me, like I said, I like the history of the 19X, and I like the 19X itself, so I like to leave it kind of bone stock from the frame perspective, because I like what the 19X is, and for me it works just fine, and pretty much all of my normal magazines for Glocks work. Magpul magazines work too, so a lot of people overhype it. There are still, most magazines will still work with a 19X, even with this little nubbin here, but anyways, that's neither here nor there. The 19X is really cool, and essentially this is what I would recommend doing with a 19X. Now, if you get an MOS version of the 19X, then you don't really need an RMR cut slide. However, I would still probably look into, especially because Brownells, their slides are not super expensive, I would probably look at getting a compensated version, just because, like I said, if you go with an onboard internal compensated barrel with, you know, a slide that is cut for it, you get a lot of control back to your shooting, and so it really does help dial you in. And once again, this is louder than standard Glock 19 that doesn't have, you know, a barrel that's ported, but it is really nice. I think the compensator ports really do help. I will say about the only bad thing about having the compensator or ports, just like having any compensator or ported barrel, is when you're pushing this much gas out of the top of the slide, you will have to clean it. And I think this is why a lot of like military and a lot of, you know, law enforcement stuff, they don't have compensated or ported barrels, is it just makes fouling a lot more noticeable. Like hopefully you guys can see here, not really sure, it's black soot, so you know it's kind of hard to see, but I mean, as far as it goes, this gun is not unreliable. I haven't had any failures with it, but you know, extra carbon buildup on the top of the slide does make it a little bit more gritty. Once again, you guys probably can't really hear or see, but you know, you do have to clean these more regularly because you're getting extra deposits of carbon building up on your barrel where the ports and compensators are. So you do have to be a little bit more fastidious with cleaning stuff. So anyways, that's about the only bad downside to it, but realistically, I mean, this thing is still reliable. It will still shoot even as it's slightly fouled up, but just something to keep in mind. So anyways, that is the Glock 19X, the way I would do it, and hopefully enjoyed the shooting portion of this. As always, guys, God bless, and I'm out.